Drum Corps International, marching music's major league. Ever since 1972, when DCI held its first competitive season, the activity has been immensely growing in popularity. DCI is one of the most impressive displays of musical and athletic abilities, with the members spending as much as 12 hours a day for upward of 3 months learning and perfecting their shows. But things were different many decades ago. Drum corps have their origins rooted in military drum and bugle units returning home from war. Eventually these units became obsolete and their equipment was sold to veteran organizations like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, and the American Legion. As these civilian and military corps began performing, rivalries began to emerge. This led to the beginning of the competitive circuit. In 1971, the leaders of 13 different corps met at an annual meeting to discuss forming a new independent governing body. This was due to the VFW and the American Legion not compensating corps that weren't sponsored through them, leading to a lot of financial insecurity. There was a lot of pushback from other powerful people in the world of drum corps, but 1972 saw the inaugural season of Drum Corps International. While only 13 corps founded DCI, 49 total corps gathered at the first ever DCI World Championships, with the first ever championship title going to the Anaheim Kingsmen. Today, corps travel across the country and bring in hundreds of thousands of fans across 35 different states. These individuals are the professionals of their craft. Like the NFL is to football and the NBA is to basketball, DCI is the top of the top, best of the best. However, unlike those other organizations, the members don't have multi-million-dollar contracts, nor does DCI bring in tens of billions of dollars every year. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the person, DCI doesn't exist on that plane, but that doesn't make it any less unique. The combination of the high levels of musical and visual proficiency is what draws so many spectators to the shows every summer. Between the love of music and the pursuit of excellence, DCI is a distinctive organization with some of the most talented minds in the world of the marching arts. However, within the DCI community lies a long-standing and very hotly debated topic, the classic era versus the modern era. Which is better? The classic era of drum corps is often given different time frames. However, for the sake of this video, I'll be defining the classic era from 1972 to 1989. During this period, drum corps still used a lot of traditional themes and ideas of the time, many of these being well-known musical selections, older marching styles, and military-based drill. While these styles of shows could be considered simple compared to today's shows, they still require just as much dedication from the members. Next, let's discuss some of the big changes that define this era. In 1974, 2 mallet percussion instruments were allowed in competition, but they could only be marched. This opened the soundscape more to auxiliary voices from these simple yet important instruments. The horn line got their first change from 1977 to 79, when two-valved instruments were ruled legal. This meant that brass arrangers and performers had even more room to work with musically. Okay, so an interesting side note, when that proposal was passed to allow two-valved instruments in competition, a very interesting disclaimer was added that says, it reads as follows. Note, DCI would like to go on record as being permanently opposed to any three-valved instruments. Starting in 1978, corps could begin their shows from anywhere on the field rather than behind the sideline. This led to stationary percussion instruments and eventually the pit box being introduced in 1982. The front ensemble was born, and shows started to gain more and more depth with the addition of these instruments. Finally, in 1987, the front ensemble could use the entirety of the front sideline. So, I feel we could define the classic era of drum corps as a time when the activity was evolving, but at a slower pace that didn't stray too far from its origins. The older, two-valved bugles, traditional marching styles, and drill formations, along with well-known music, were some of the key points of this era. However, one of the biggest defining factors would be the lack of electronics. At the time, the only amplification allowed in the activity was the bells of the horns, and from my understanding, these shows were loud. A lot of people cite this as the key factor of the era: loud, uninhibited brass. Even though electronics didn't make their way to the activity until the 2000s, I feel that the modern era began in the 90s. More changes were introduced that set the organization apart from its roots, although not out of spite. Times were changing, technology was improving, and DCI wanted to move forward as well. Welcome to the modern era. The 1990s saw the approval of three-valved instruments. These horns were still required to be in the key of G, just like their two-valved predecessors. Despite this, horn lines would begin to take on the cleaner, more mechanical sound that we hear today. This was cemented in 1999 when horns in the key of F and B flat were allowed. This meant for the performers and the arrangers, the door was opened even wider. Musical proficiency was only rising, and the technicality of the music was skyrocketing. These two changes are why I feel the modern era began forming in the 90s. No longer were corps required to use traditional style bugles. The available sounds were growing, and the corps made good use of the opportunities. Some people despised the change, claiming DCI was moving too far from its origins. Unfortunately for them, the activity was evolving. DCI was coming into its own and setting itself apart from all the other fields of music or athleticism. One of the two largest changes arrived in 2003. After many years of being shot down, the use of amplification for percussion voices was finally implemented. No longer did the pit have to mercilessly wail away on their instruments. From this point on, mallet instruments would have longer lifespans due to the gentler playing that was now possible. This change added a whole new level to the soundscape of DCI shows and moved the activity forward even more. This culminated in 2009, when electronic instruments were legalized for use. An entirely new family of instruments were introduced, opening the organization to even more talent. Ever since 2009, DCI shows have had some of the highest production values seen in the history of the activity, and this was on the rise ever since the 90s. I would define the modern era of drumcore as an explosion of creativity. New paths were open to explore, new instruments and crazier drill have all made themselves known in this era. Shows were becoming more elaborate, as well as the skill ceiling being raised significantly. And while other smaller changes were made in the times before and since, I feel like these are the defining changes that brought DCI to what it is today. So, where does the debate come into play? So now that we're done going through the history of drumcore and the history of the two eras of the activity, now we're going to get into the debate itself. And so I've got quite a few comments here that I'm going to dissect, some of them from YouTube, some from other sources. Now, initially this part of the video was going to be scripted, but I've decided I'm just going to do it off the top of my head because I want to break down some of these arguments and really get into why some of them are flawed. So I'm not going to be reading the entirety of all of these comments, just because a lot of them are very long-winded. Also, you can see that the names and photos are censored. That's just because the identities of these people are irrelevant to the discussion that we're having right now. And plus, a lot of them use their real names and or pictures for their profiles, and it just wouldn't be right for me to put them out there on blast. But without further ado, let's get into some of these comments. These first few comments are on one of the articles that I used as a source for this video. So, you know, they're not hard to find, as well as the YouTube comments, but I'm still just not going to put the people themselves on blast rather than just their opinions. I'm going to start out with this comment in particular because this opinion is one that I respect a lot. And I don't think there are many of these comments that I've found, but they say, I speak with people all the time who lament that drumcore should return to the old ways, but, like the author, I've accepted the changes that have been adopted. The quality of performances is certainly significantly higher, and that's probably a combination of highly talented young people and equally excellent arrangements and instruction. I agree 100%. There's definitely a lot of extremely talented people out there now in the activity, and that was the way it's always been. There's always been incredible talent in DCI, and I agree that the arrangements and instruction have increased in quality over the years, and that's allowed shows to evolve the way that they have. And so yes, this comment right here I very much agree with, but let's move on to something a little different. Oh man, this comment is ridiculous. Okay, this is more along the lines of the people that I am talking about in particular. Drumcore equals military ballet. DCI's intonation improvement is a poor trade-off for killing all the grassroots drum corps, leaving hundreds of thousands of kids without nothing but time on their hands. Take the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut. There was a time where you couldn't turn a corner and not find a corps in that city. I would like to see the youth crime stats before and after DCI. I'm going to stop right here for the moment. While I agree that activities that teach young people discipline and respect for other people are very good at reducing crime, DCI is not the only organization that can do that, nor is it the most important organization to that cause. Yet you would like to see the youth crime stats before and after DCI. I guarantee you DCI leaving the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, corps leaving that city, are not the sole reason that crime may have gone up. So the first part of this is just the commenter asking a question to another commenter that they actually knew in person back in the day, so that's irrelevant here. But they continue. Second, being a brass player, trombone and baritone, I loved many of the musical advancements through the years, but a few really got my ire. Amplifying the horns? Come on! If you can't project your sound to the back of the stands, you're doing something wrong with the teaching of brass technique. Breaking down that one first, most corps don't amplify the horn line because they can't project their sound. I've sat at the top center of a bowl stadium at many DCI competitions, open stadium as well, not closed but open. I know those are a lot better with sound quality. When you're there in person, you can tell the difference between the amplification and the power of the horn lines, because the amplification is more of an ear sensation you hear in your ears, while the force of the brass itself is something you feel in your whole body. And that's something that's very easy to distinguish, but it's not separated to a point where they don't fit together. They fit together very well, in my opinion. But let's continue. Using a soundtrack? Give me a break. That is just cheating. Was DCI copying Britney Spears, Milli Vanilli, and Beyonce? What's next? Just playback and faking it. So, again, on these pre-recorded soundtracks, most of them have to be sounds that are legitimately recorded from an instrument played by a member of the drum corps. The good example is the pitch shift in Tilt from the Bluecoats. That was audio recorded of the horn line that was then manipulated in post-production. So it is still a sound, a group of sounds that were performed by the group itself. You're not allowed to use external sounds unless they are like voiceovers, etc. The next one says the beginning of the golden and best years of drum corps, 1983 to 2003, until drum corps became the Michael Jackson Cirque du Soleil freak show it is now. Jeez, that's kind of harsh. That's insulting to Michael Jackson and Cirque du Soleil. Anyways, 83 to 2003 is a very interesting period because that's when the pit was there in full, unrestricted. However, there were no amplification factors until that 2003 season. So that could be considered the golden years of drum corps because it had traditional bugles, an evolving marching style definitely into 2003 because the bugles were upgraded to 3-valved instruments in the 90s, different keys in the late 90s, and so that's a very diverse period in and of itself, but I very much disagree that it is a freak show now. Oh man, this person's a little heated. Take it from an old band director. The term DCI is misleading nowadays. Should SBI, Show Band International. Band directors, and I was one of them, are obsessed intonation. Let's read that sentence one more time, but a little slower. Band directors and I was one of them are obsessed intonation. Okay, got that. Okay. But even the pros have problems with intonation. I'll take the not so perfect pitch for the volume. They are outdoors for Pete's sake, not in a concert hall. Entertain me. So at least this guy identifies why he prefers the old one. He says, I'll take the not so perfect pitch of the older G bugles for the volume because they could be louder, especially with more people. However, the amplification of today is nice, and having a ton of horns now, even if they aren't necessarily as loud, they are loud, very loud, like 110-ish decibels loud. But yeah, that one sentence gave me an aneurysm. So with that kind of spelling mistake, your opinion's invalid. Next. When intonation wasn't required in drum corps, but seriously, why can't we just love drum corps for both what it was and what it is now? If modern corps didn't have earlier corps, it wouldn't be what it is today. If early corps is all that there was, a lot of young people would miss out on the opportunity of a lifetime to do something bigger than themselves and perform in some awesome shows while they're at it. Let's just love drum corps as a whole. I agree. I agree 100%. Alright, holy crap. This is a reply to that comment that I agree with wholeheartedly. Just like the activity for what it was, what it is now, and what it was. I gotta get comfortable to read this reply. You have no clue as to what you're talking about. You're just a candied punk that knows zero about our era. You and these other punk snowflakes think you know more than we do? You do not. Our intonation was great with the G bugles, and our marching was far superior. Holy crap. Okay. He continues, if drum corps stayed as it was, it would get more support from us. The status quo now is that most of us do not give two cares about the trash of today. Well, if it stayed like it was, the community would get smaller and smaller because the fan base would be getting older and older. P.S. Never call this trash drum corps ever again. And in our day, 50s to 83, there were many corps from the East that had full membership and their own championships. It was open to average kids and not snobby bastards like you. Get with it, son. Wow, that last comment? Average kids? Snobby bastards? Like, I'm trying to process this. Average kids. Okay. What does he mean snobby? Like, you have to audition and be really good to get into like a top 12 world-class drum corps? That just means that the skill ceiling has gone up. Dude, holy crap. So that's only some of the comments. I didn't want this section of the video to be incredibly long, but I am going to be uploading a bonus video sometime in the future containing the rest of the comments that I didn't show in this video, and I promise you there are some real doozies in there. So now that we're done with the discussion here and going through picking apart some of these opinions here of this, again, very small minority of the DCI community, I think we could go ahead and close out the video. So, where do I lie? I have a ton of respect and admiration for the classic era of drum corps. The raw power of older shows is still very obvious to this day, and I believe that these shows should never be forgotten. They paved the road for what we know today. While I grew up with the modern era, I still look back fondly on any shows from the past. I can respect the traditions of older shows while also being grateful for the modernity of today's shows. This is the best way to look at it, in my opinion. DCI had to evolve with the times. I think had the activity stayed the same for so long, the community would be smaller and smaller. DCI had to change in order to offer its members the best opportunities to learn and improve, as well as allowing the staff far more room for creativity. The activity isn't bad today, nor was it ever bad. The old days were the building blocks of the marching arts, and the modern days are the culmination of decades of change and growth.
What if it's me looking down on me? The world above must also be. This could go on for infinity. Color-coded just to keep me sane. My world is finally starting to take shape. I press the button and it bursts into life. This time nothing will escape my sight.
Drum Corps International has and always will be a unique display of musicianship and athleticism. So try to enjoy every show for what they really are, a push for excellence. No matter if you prefer past or present shows, they're all unique in their own ways, regardless of date. Every member puts their all into these shows, and I believe they all deserve to be appreciated. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, take care.